The smell of baked salmon and rosemary filled the house before I even stepped inside. For a moment, I just stood at the front door, my hand hovering over the brass handle that used to feel so familiar. This house had once been mine, every wall painted by my hands, every piece of furniture chosen with care, every corner holding a memory of a life I thought would last forever. Now it belonged to someone else, or at least it felt that way. I took a breath, straightened my coat, and stepped inside. "Mary, you made it." My son Daniel called from the living room, his voice warm but distracted. He didn't come to greet me. He rarely did anymore. "I'm here," I replied, forcing a smile he couldn't see. The house looked different again. New curtains, new lighting. Even the hallway table, the one my late husband had restored himself, had been replaced with something sleek and cold. I tightened my grip on the casserole dish I had brought. "Where should I put this?" I asked, stepping into the kitchen. Clara turned around. She was wearing a fitted cream dress, her hair perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. She looked like she belonged in a magazine, not in a kitchen. "Oh," she said, glancing at the dish like it was something mildly inconvenient. "You brought food." "I thought it might help," I said quietly. She gave a small smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "That's sweet. You can just leave it there." She pointed to a crowded corner of the counter, already filled with untouched dishes. I hesitated, then set mine down carefully, as if placing it gently might somehow make it more welcome. "Actually," Clara continued, turning back to a drawer, "since you're here, I could use a little help." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. Before I could respond, she pulled out an apron. Not just any apron. My apron. Blue, with small white flowers, faded now, but unmistakable. I had worn it for years while cooking for my family. For Daniel. For my husband. For holidays. For birthdays. For quiet Sunday mornings. "Oh," I said softly. "I haven't seen that in a while." "Yes," Clara said lightly. "I found it when we reorganized the kitchen. Thought it might come in handy." She stepped closer, and before I fully understood what was happening, she slipped it over my head. The fabric fell against me like a memory I hadn't asked to revisit. "There we go," she said, tying it tightly behind my back. "Perfect." I froze. "I didn't realize," I began. "Oh, don't be modest," she interrupted smoothly. "You've always loved cooking, haven't you?" I glanced toward the living room. Daniel was laughing with his guests, colleagues, I assumed. Well-dressed, confident people holding glasses of wine. People who didn't know me. Or worse, people who would only know me like this. Clara raised her voice slightly. "Everyone," she called, drawing attention effortlessly. "This is Daniel's mother, Mary." A few heads turned. Polite smiles. Curious eyes. "And tonight," she added with a light laugh, "she's helping us out." It's so nice to have someone experienced handling the serving, don't you think? There was a ripple of quiet chuckles. My ears rang. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile. "Of course," I said. "Happy to help." And just like that, I disappeared. For the next 2 hours, I moved through the house like a shadow, carrying trays, pouring drinks, clearing plates. Each step felt heavier than the last. "Careful with that," Clara would say, her tone pleasant but edged with something sharp. "That glass goes over there." "Oh, you missed a spot." Always said just loud enough. Always with that smile. Once, a man in a gray suit offered to help me. "Let me take that," he said kindly. Clara appeared instantly. "No, no," she said, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "You're a guest." Mary insists on keeping busy. Her fingers pressed into my shoulder, not hard, but firm enough to remind me. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I don't mind," but I did. I minded every second. What hurt the most wasn't Clara. It was Daniel.
He saw.
I know he saw. And yet he said nothing. Not when she corrected me. Not when she introduced me like hired help. Not when I stood there, invisible in my own home. At one point, our eyes met across the room. Just for a second. I waited. For something. A look. A gesture. A word. But he just nodded, like I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do. And then he turned away. Something inside me cracked. By the time the guests left, my hands were trembling. The house fell quiet again, but not peaceful. Empty. Thanks, Mom, Daniel said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. That really helped. Helped. I swallowed. I'm glad, I said. Clara stretched dramatically. I'm exhausted, she said. Hosting is so much work. She glanced at the sink, still full of dishes. You can finish up here, right, Mary? Just let yourself out when you're done.
I served her.
At the kitchen. At the place where I had once stood as the heart of this home. Now I was being dismissed from it. Of course, I said quietly. They didn't even notice when I left. That night, I sat in my car outside my apartment long after the engine had gone cold. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but I wasn't really there. I kept seeing it. The apron. The smiles. Daniel looking away. For years, I had told myself stories. That things change. That children grow up. That marriages shift priorities. That I needed to be patient, understanding, accommodating. But tonight stripped all of that away. This wasn't distance. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was something else. Something deliberate. Something I had allowed. A slow, quiet erosion of my place in my own son's life. And I had stood there and accepted it. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, a different thought appeared. Not sadness. Not confusion. Not even anger.
Clarity.
Something had to change.
I didn't know how yet.
But I knew one thing for certain. The woman who walked into that house tonight was not the same woman who would walk in next time. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, even though I had barely slept. My body felt heavy, but my mind refused to rest, replaying every moment from the dinner over and over again like a scene I couldn't escape. I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, staring at nothing in particular, yet seeing everything all at once. It wasn't just about the apron. It wasn't just about the humiliation. What unsettled me most was how familiar it all felt, not as a single event, but as part of something larger, something I had ignored for far too long. When Daniel first introduced me to Clara 4 years ago, I had been genuinely happy for him. After my husband passed, Daniel had become my anchor, the one person who made the silence of the house bearable. He used to call me every evening just to check in, just to talk. When he met Clara, I told myself this was a good thing, that he deserved companionship, happiness, a life beyond grief. And at first, Clara had seemed perfect. She was attentive, polite, even affectionate in a way that felt almost rehearsed. She hugged me tightly the first time we met and said, "Daniel talks about you all the time. I feel like I already know you." I remember thinking how lucky I was. I remember thinking she would be like a daughter to me. But looking back now, I realized the shift didn't happen suddenly. It was subtle, almost invisible at first. Small comments that felt insignificant on their own, but together formed something much heavier. I remember the first time I felt it, a small dinner at their apartment. I had brought a framed photo of Daniel as a child, standing in the backyard with his father, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. It was one of my favorite memories. Clara had taken the frame, smiled, and said, "It's sweet, but it doesn't really match our interior style, does it?" She laughed softly, as if it were a harmless joke, and set it aside. The photo never made it onto any shelf or wall. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was being sensitive. Then there were the traditions that quietly disappeared. Every December, Daniel and I used to bake together, the same recipes, the same music playing in the background, the same laughter filling the kitchen. The first Christmas after he married Clara, I suggested we continue the tradition. Clara smiled politely and said, "We've actually planned something a bit more modern this year. Something less traditional." Daniel hesitated, just for a second, but then he nodded. "Maybe next year, Mom," he said. But next year never came. And neither did the one after that. The distance grew in ways that were easy to excuse at the time. Missed calls, canceled visits, invitations that came later and later, until sometimes they didn't come at all. "We're just busy," Daniel would say. "Work has been crazy." And I believed him. I wanted to believe him, because the alternative that I was no longer a priority was too painful to accept. Clara's comments became more frequent, though always wrapped in politeness. "You're so brave for living alone at your age," she once said, tilting her head slightly. "I don't think I could do it." Another time, watching me struggle with a new phone, she laughed lightly. "Technology really isn't made for everyone, is it?" Each remark was small, almost harmless, but together they chipped away at something inside me, leaving behind doubt where confidence used to be. The house was another turning point. After my husband died, the space felt too large, too quiet, too full of memories that echoed in every empty room. When Daniel and Clara mentioned they were looking for a place, I offered them mine without hesitation. It felt right, like I was keeping the home alive, keeping it in the family. Clara had insisted on a formal rental agreement. At the time, I admired her practicality. Now I see it differently. It wasn't about clarity. It was about control. From the moment they moved in, the house began to change. Not gradually, but deliberately. My furniture replaced. My decorations removed. The garden my husband had spent years cultivating paved over in a single weekend. "We wanted to make it our own," Daniel said, and I nodded, even though it felt like pieces of my life were being erased one by one. My visits became less frequent, and when I did come, I felt like a guest in a place that once held my entire world. There was always a reason for the distance, always an explanation that made sense just enough for me not to question it. But the dinner party had been different. There had been no subtlety, no politeness masking intention. It had been clear, intentional,
Public.
and what hurt most was not Clara's behavior, it was Daniel's silence. That silence echoed louder than anything she had said. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my neighbor, Susan, standing there with a concerned expression and a container of soup in her hands. "I saw your lights on early," she said. "Thought you might not have slept." I stepped aside to let her in, and as we sat together at the table, I told her everything. Not just about the dinner, but about the years leading up to it. The small moments I had dismissed. The feelings I had buried. Susan listened without interrupting, her face growing more serious with every word. When I finished, she leaned forward and said something that stayed with me long after she left. "Mary," she said gently, "this didn't start last night. Last night was just the first time you couldn't ignore it anymore." After she left, the apartment felt quieter than before, but also clearer, like a fog had lifted, revealing something I had been avoiding. I walked to the window and looked out toward the street, toward the direction of my old house. It was still there, unchanged from the outside, holding within it a life that no longer belonged to me, or perhaps one I had given away too easily. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I had been too afraid to face before. What if I had been wrong all along? What if keeping the peace had cost me more than conflict ever would have? That thought stayed with me for the rest of the day, settling into something firm and unshakable. By evening, it had transformed into something else entirely. Not anger, not bitterness. Something quieter, but stronger. Resolve. For years, I had adjusted myself to fit into a space that kept shrinking. I had lowered my voice, softened my presence, accepted less and less, all in the hope of holding on to a relationship that was slipping away anyway. But now, sitting alone in that small apartment, I realized something I should have understood long ago. Love does not ask you to disappear. And if it does, it isn't love at all. The park was quieter than usual that afternoon, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel sharper. The rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the soft murmur of voices drifting from nearby benches. I hadn't planned to come here. I had only meant to take a short walk, to clear my head after another restless morning, but somehow my feet had led me to this place, as if part of me already knew something important was about to happen. I chose a bench beneath a large oak tree, its branches stretching wide enough to cast a cool shadow over me, and sat down, folding my hands in my lap as I stared at the pond in front of me. The water was still, almost unnaturally so, reflecting the pale sky above it like a mirror that refused to reveal anything deeper. For a while, I simply sat there, letting my thoughts drift without direction. But no matter how hard I tried to quiet my mind, it kept circling back to the same place: the dinner, Clara's voice, Daniel's silence. It was as if something inside me was finally demanding to be acknowledged, something I had spent years pushing aside. I didn't notice how much time had passed until a familiar laugh cut through the stillness, sharp and unmistakable. My body stiffened before I even turned my head. Clara. She was sitting at a small cafe just across the path, her back partially turned toward me, but her voice carried easily through the open space. Across from her sat a woman I recognized vaguely, tall, blonde, always impeccably dressed, someone I had seen once or twice at gatherings, but never spoken to directly. They were leaning toward each other, their conversation animated, casual, unguarded in a way that made my chest tighten with unease. I should have stood up. I should have walked away. But I didn't. Something held me there, rooted to the bench, hidden just enough behind the tree that they didn't notice me. You should have seen it, Clara said, laughing lightly. She just stood there, completely lost, like she didn't even realize what was happening. The other woman raised an eyebrow. Seriously? That's bold. Wasn't she embarrassed? Clara shrugged, taking a sip of her drink. I don't think she even understands how she comes across. It's actually kind of sad. Always trying so hard to be included, hovering around like she belongs somewhere she doesn't. Each word landed with quiet precision, sinking deeper than I expected. My fingers tightened around the edge of the bench. But Daniel didn't say anything? The woman asked. Clara smiled, not the polite, controlled smile she used in front of others, but something colder, sharper. Daniel sees what I want him to see. It didn't happen overnight, obviously. You have to be patient with these things. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? The woman leaned forward, clearly intrigued. I mean, Clara said casually, people don't just change their perspective on someone for no reason. You have to guide them. Little comments here and there. Point out behaviors. Frame things in a certain way. Eventually, they start to see it too. My breath caught. She used to be the center of his world, Clara continued. But that's not healthy, is it? A grown man still emotionally tied to his mother like that. I just helped him outgrow it. The woman let out a soft laugh. That's one way to put it. It's the truth, Clara said, her tone light but unwavering. And now, he barely notices. It's actually impressive when you think about it. I felt something inside me shift. Not break, not collapse, but shift, like a foundation realigning under pressure. So what's next? The woman asked. You've already got the house. What else is there? Clara leaned back slightly, her expression thoughtful for a moment before that same cold smile returned. The house isn't really ours yet, she said. Not officially, but it will be. My heart began to pound, each beat louder than the last. She's still holding on to it, Clara continued.
Technically.
But honestly, it's only a matter of time. She'd do anything to stay in Daniel's life. All we have to do is present it the right way. And she'll just give it to you? The woman asked, disbelief mixing with curiosity. Clara laughed softly. You'd be surprised what people will agree to when they're afraid of being alone. We'll frame it as something practical. Something that benefits everyone. Less responsibility for her, more stability for us. Maybe even mention a nice retirement community, somewhere quiet, comfortable, far enough away. The words echoed in my mind, each one clearer than the last. Far enough away. And Daniel, the woman pressed. He's okay with all this? Clara waved a hand dismissively. Daniel trusts me. That's the important thing. He doesn't question things anymore, not really. He knows I'm thinking about our future. And as long as he believes that, everything else falls into place. I didn't realize I had stood up until I felt the gravel shift beneath my shoes. My body moved before my mind could catch up, carrying me away from the bench, away from the cafe, away from the sound of Clara's voice that now seemed to echo far louder than it should have. I walked without direction, without awareness of where I was going, my thoughts racing faster than I could process them. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it.
Calm. Certain. Planned.
This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't miscommunication. This was intention. Years of it. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were trembling so badly I had to try twice before I managed to unlock the door. I stepped inside and closed it behind me, leaning back against it as if I needed something solid to keep me upright. The silence of the room pressed in around me, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt charged, alive with everything I had just heard. I walked slowly to the center of the room and sat down, staring at the wall without really seeing it. Pieces of the past began to rearrange themselves in my mind, moments that once seemed harmless now taking on entirely new meaning. The comments, the distance, the subtle shifts in Daniel's behavior. It all fit together now in a way that was impossible to ignore. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself what I had done wrong, because the answer was becoming painfully clear. This had never been about me. My phone rang suddenly, cutting through the silence, like a sharp crack. I jumped slightly before reaching for it, my heart still racing. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, but I didn't. Hello, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Hey, Mom. Daniel's voice came through, casual, familiar, as if nothing had changed. Listen, Clara and I were hoping you could come by this weekend. There's something we want to talk to you about. I closed my eyes briefly. I see, I said. It's about the house, he added. Don't worry, it's nothing bad. We just think it's time to adjust things a bit. Make things easier for everyone. Easier. The words settled heavily in my chest. I could hear Clara's voice in my mind, clear as if she were standing beside me. Frame it the right way. I opened my eyes, my gaze steady now, focused. I'll come, I said. Great, Daniel replied, relief evident in his tone. We'll see you then. The call ended, leaving behind a silence that felt very different from before. I sat there for a long time, not moving, not speaking, just thinking. This time, there was no confusion, no doubt.
No hesitation.
I knew exactly what they were planning. And for the first time in years, I also knew exactly what I was going to do. I didn't sleep the night before I went to see Daniel and Clara. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind refused to slow down, moving steadily through every possibility, every word I might say, every reaction I might face. Strangely, there were no tears this time.
No helplessness.
What I felt instead was something unfamiliar but steady, a quiet kind of strength that didn't need to prove itself, only to exist. By morning, I had already made my decision, and once it was made, there was no going back. I dressed carefully, not out of vanity, but out of respect for myself. A dark green dress I hadn't worn in years, simple but elegant, and the necklace my husband had given me on our anniversary, not because I needed courage, but because I wanted to remember who I was before I allowed myself to become invisible. Before going to the house, I had one stop to make. I met with Mr. Harrison, the attorney who had handled my late husband's estate. His office hadn't changed much, the same quiet atmosphere, the same shelves lined with files, the same sense of order. He listened to me without interruption as I explained everything: the rental agreement, the years of undercharging, my concerns about what Daniel and Clara were about to propose. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and said something that stayed with me. "You've been generous," he said, "but generosity without boundaries often invites entitlement." He explained my rights clearly. The house was entirely mine. The agreement allowed for rent adjustments with proper notice. Legally, I owed them nothing beyond what was already written. That clarity didn't just inform me, it grounded me. For the first time, I understood not just how I felt, but where I stood. From there, I met with a real estate agent, a practical woman named Judith, who confirmed what I had only begun to suspect. The property's value had increased significantly. The rent I had been charging wasn't just below market, it was far below. "You could easily triple it," she said matter-of-factly. "And it would still be considered reasonable for this area." I almost laughed at the irony. The improvements Clara had been so proud of had only increased the value of something that was never hers to begin with. By the time I left that meeting, everything was clear. Not just legally, personally. When I arrived at the house later that afternoon, I didn't hesitate at the door this time. I rang the bell and stood straight, my shoulders relaxed, my breathing steady. Daniel opened the door almost immediately. He looked slightly tense, like someone preparing for a conversation he didn't fully understand. "Mom," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Thanks for coming." I nodded, stepping inside. The house looked exactly as it had the last time: polished, curated, unfamiliar. But this time, it didn't unsettle me. It simply was. Clara appeared from the living room, her expression composed but watchful. "Mary," she said with a polite smile, "I'm glad you could make it. We've been looking forward to talking with you." I met her gaze calmly. "So have I," I replied. We sat down in the living room, the same space that once held so many memories, now stripped of everything that connected it to me. Daniel sat forward, his hands clasped together, while Clara leaned back slightly, as if already confident in how this would unfold. There was a brief silence before Daniel spoke. "Mom, we've been thinking a lot about the future," he began. "About what makes the most sense for everyone." I nodded slightly. "Go on." Clara leaned in, her voice smooth and measured. "We believe it would be best if the house were officially transferred into our names. It simplifies things, removes unnecessary complications, and ensures stability moving forward. For all of us." There it was, exactly as I had heard it in the park. The same careful wording, the same illusion of reason. I let a moment pass before responding. "That's interesting," I said calmly, "because I've also been thinking about the future. And about the house." I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. The shift in the room was immediate, subtle, but undeniable. Clara's posture stiffened slightly. Daniel frowned. "I met with my attorney," I continued, "and a real estate agent. It seems I've been significantly undercharging rent for quite some time." Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" I slid the documents toward them. I mean that properties like this are renting for nearly 3 times what you're currently paying. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. Clara was the first to react. Mary, that's not relevant, she said quickly. We're talking about ownership, not rent. It's entirely relevant, I replied evenly, because it reflects the reality of the situation, one I've ignored for too long. Daniel looked between us, confusion and tension building in his expression. Mom, are you saying you want to raise the rent? He asked. I'm saying, I answered, that effective in 30 days, the rent will be adjusted to match current market value. Clara's composure cracked. That's ridiculous, she snapped. You can't just do that. Actually, I said, meeting her gaze directly, I can. It's outlined clearly in the agreement you insisted on. Daniel stood up, running a hand through his hair. Mom, this is sudden. Why now? For a moment I looked at him, really looked at him, not as the boy I had raised, but as the man standing in front of me, trying to reconcile two realities at once. Because now I understand what's been happening, I said quietly, and I'm no longer willing to ignore it. Clara crossed her arms. You're overreacting, she said sharply. This is emotional, not rational. No, I replied, my voice calm but firm. What I did before was emotional. This is rational. Daniel exhaled slowly. Is this about the dinner? He asked. It's about everything, I said. The dinner was just the moment I stopped pretending. Clara let out a short, incredulous laugh. So you're punishing us because you felt embarrassed? I shook my head. This isn't punishment. It's correction. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different. Not tense, but decisive. I'm not transferring ownership of the house, I continued. And I'm no longer going to support a situation where I am disrespected in a place that is still mine. Daniel looked shaken now, caught between something he hadn't yet fully processed. So, what happens if we can't afford the new rent? He asked quietly. I held his gaze. Then you'll need to find another place to live. Clara stood up abruptly. This is unbelievable, she said. After everything we've done here. What you've done, I interrupted gently, was for yourselves. And that's fine. But it doesn't entitle you to take what isn't yours. She stared at me, anger flashing openly now. You're making a mistake. I stood up as well, picking up my bag. No, I said softly. I'm correcting one. Daniel didn't try to stop me as I walked toward the door. He didn't argue.
He didn't speak.
And for the first time in years, I didn't wait for him to. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, not easier, but clearer. Like something that had been pressing down on me for years had finally lifted just enough for me to stand upright again. As I walked to my car, I realized something that surprised even me. I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. Because, whatever came after this, at least it would be honest. The first few days after that conversation were the hardest. Not because I doubted my decision, but because of the silence that followed it. It wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, deliberate, filled with everything that wasn't being said. Daniel didn't call. Clara didn't send a message. The house that had once been the center of my life now felt like a closed door I had chosen, for the first time, not to knock on. I went about my days as usual, making tea, reading, walking through familiar streets, but everything felt slightly altered, as if the world had shifted just enough to remind me that something irreversible had happened. And yet, beneath that discomfort, there was something else too. A steadiness I hadn't felt in years. A week passed, then another. I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that caring didn't mean chasing. It didn't mean shrinking myself to fit into someone else's expectations. It didn't mean accepting less than respect just to maintain a connection. For the first time, I allowed space to exist, real space, Not the kind filled with excuses or forced conversations, but the kind that reveals truth simply by being there. On the 18th day, my phone rang. I knew it was Daniel before I even looked at the screen. For a moment, I just held the phone in my hand, feeling the weight of everything behind that single call. Then I answered. Hello. Mom, his voice sounded different. Quieter. Not distant, just uncertain. Can we meet? I didn't hesitate. Yes. We chose a small cafe halfway between us, neutral ground neither of us could claim. I arrived early, more out of habit than necessity, and sat by the window, watching people pass by without really seeing them. When Daniel walked in, I almost didn't recognize him at first. Not because he had changed physically, but because something in his posture had shifted. He looked tired, yes, but also aware in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. He sat down across from me, and for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. How have you been? He asked finally. I've been all right, I said. And you? He exhaled slowly, looking down at his hands before answering. It's been complicated. I nodded slightly. I imagine it has. Another pause. Then he spoke again, more directly this time. We're moving out. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I see. We found a place, he continued.
Smaller.
Temporary. And Clara? I asked. He hesitated just briefly. She won't be moving with me. That surprised me, though I kept my expression steady. You separated? Daniel nodded. Not officially, but yes. For now. There was a long silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like something fragile was being rebuilt, piece by piece, word by word. I've been thinking about everything you said, he continued. About that night. About everything before it. He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something I had missed more than I realized. Honesty, unfiltered and unguarded. You were right. The words settled between us quietly, but their impact was anything but small. I should have seen it, he said, his voice tightening slightly. I should have said something. I knew things felt off, but I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal, that it was just personality differences, that it would sort itself out. He paused, swallowing hard. But it didn't, and I didn't. I listened without interrupting. After you left that day, he went on, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about how I stood there and did nothing. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just that night.
It was a pattern.
Things I ignored. Things I justified. He let out a quiet, almost bitter laugh. Things I let happen because it was easier than dealing with them. That happens more often than people realize, I said gently. He shook his head. It shouldn't have happened with you. Not like that. There it was, not just acknowledgement, but understanding. I spoke to Clara, he added after a moment. About what you said. About the park. My heart skipped slightly, but I remained still. She denied it at first, he said. Then she admitted some of it. Then more. His expression hardened just slightly. Not in a way that sounded like regret. More like justification. Like she thought she was right. I closed my eyes briefly, not out of pain, but out of recognition. I didn't know what to do with that, he continued. But I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. We sat in silence again, but this time it felt different. Not like something was missing, but like something was finally being allowed to exist. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just my son, but a man who was trying, imperfectly but sincerely, to understand where he had gone wrong. I know, I said. And I meant it. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, he added quickly. I don't even know if they should, but I want to try, to do better, if you'll let me. For a moment, I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to be sure that whatever I said came from truth, not habit. I'm not interested in going back, I said finally. but I am open to moving forward. Relief flickered across his face, subtle but unmistakable. That's all I'm asking for, he said. We stayed there for hours, talking in a way we hadn't in years. Openly, honestly, without the careful avoidance that had once defined our conversations. It wasn't perfect. There were pauses, hesitations, moments where words felt insufficient. But it was real.
And that was enough.
Months passed, and slowly, something new began to take shape between us. Not the old dynamic, not the one built on silent expectations and unspoken compromises, but something steadier.
We met regularly.
Talked more. Listened, truly listened, in a way we hadn't before. It wasn't effortless, but it was genuine. The house was no longer part of our connection, and in a way, that made things clearer. It was rented to a young family who filled it with laughter and life, and for the first time in years, it felt like a home again, even if it wasn't mine in the way it once had been. The financial stability it brought allowed me to move into a place that felt comfortable, not temporary, not like something I had settled for. One afternoon, Daniel and I stood outside that house together, watching as the new tenants' children played in the yard. Their laughter echoed in a way that felt both familiar and new. They're taking good care of it, he said. They are, I replied. It's nice to see it alive again. He nodded, then glanced at me. I've been thinking, maybe we could take that trip you always talked about. The one you and Dad planned. I smiled, feeling something warm settle in my chest. I'd like that, I said. And I meant that too. As I drove home later, I thought about everything that had changed, not just around me, but within me. I had lost certain illusions, yes. The belief that love alone could fix everything. The idea that silence preserved relationships. But in losing those things, I had gained something far more important. Clarity, self-respect, and the understanding that real connection doesn't require you to disappear. The woman who once stood quietly in that kitchen, wearing an apron that felt like a symbol of everything she had allowed, she was still part of me. But she no longer defined me. Now, when I look at my life, I don't see what I lost. I see what I finally chose to keep. And that has made all the difference.